She thought she was humiliating a nobody, but the man standing silently beneath the spilled wine was the CEO who would soon control her entire future. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I'm dropping a beautiful story you definitely don't want to miss. The lights of the Harrington Grand Ballroom glimmered like molten gold, reflecting off crystal chandeliers and bouncing across polished marble floors. Music drifted through the air, low, classy, and a little too cheerful for the number of people pretending to enjoy themselves. It was the annual gala of Aurora Dynamics, a social event everyone dreaded but attended anyway, because appearances were currency in this company. And in that crowd, standing near the back as though trying to blend with the shadows, was Ethan Ward. He looked like any other consultant, simple navy suit, no tie, sleeves rolled up slightly as if he wasn't used to formal wear. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, they carried a storm. Observant. Calculating. Sad, even. He didn't belong here. But he owned the room. Quite literally. No one knew that the new anonymous consultant hired last month was actually the incoming CEO, the silent majority shareholder who had just bought the company. Ethan had chosen to enter quietly, to feel the heartbeat of the people before revealing himself. He wanted to see the truth, how employees acted when they weren't trying to impress a boss. He wasn't prepared for how cruel people could be when they believed you had nothing to offer them. A soft voice echoed in his memory, one he'd buried years ago. People will treat you differently when they think you can't do anything for them. Watch carefully, Ethan, that's how you know their true selves. His father's words. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. Across the room, a cluster of young employees laughed too loudly, already on their fourth round of drinks. But it was the woman standing in the center of them who stole Ethan's attention without meaning to. Grace Turner. A storm wrapped in elegance. Green dress hugging her waist, blonde waves brushing her shoulders, eyes bright but carrying exhaustion she tried to hide under humor. She laughed with her co-workers, but the laughter never reached her eyes. Ethan had noticed her weeks ago, not because she was beautiful though she was, but because she was always kind to the front desk staff, always thanked the cleaning crew, always stayed late to help the interns. She was, without effort, everything he valued in a person. But tonight, she looked different. Tighter. Frustrated. Trying too hard to seem like the carefree girl of the group. And he noticed. He always knew. He just stood there, soaked still, letting her see the quiet devastation she'd caused. Grace swallowed hard. The humiliation she'd meant as a harmless joke suddenly felt like violence. Even the room seemed to realize it, laughter fading, replaced by whispers that curled like smoke. Grace, holy crap, I didn't think you'd actually do it, her coworker muttered behind her, nervous now. It was just, I mean. But she barely heard him. Her eyes were locked on Ethan's, eyes too calm, too wounded, too human. Eyes that did something strange to her chest. He wasn't angry. He looked disappointed. He looked tired. He looked hurt. Why did that affect her? Why did it feel like she'd torn something she didn't understand? She stepped back, instinctively, guilt pressing into her spine. The apology caught in her throat. Before she could finish, the event coordinator swooped in, flustered and whispering harshly. Sir, I'm so sorry, this is unacceptable. Please, let me get towels. Ethan lifted a hand, subtle but firm. No, he murmured. It's fine. But it wasn't. And everyone knew it. He turned slightly, not to hide but to breathe, and in that tiny motion, Grace saw the pain he struggled to swallow. Her chest tightened painfully. Meanwhile, her co-workers began to retreat, pretending they had nothing to do with it. We should, go to the photo booth, one muttered. Like now. Cowards. She hated them a little for that. But she hated herself more. Ethan stepped aside and moved toward the nearest exit, each step measured, controlled, the walk of a man who had learned to endure humiliation in silence far too many times. Why does he seem so familiar? Why does this feel wrong? Why am I hurting like I just damaged something important? Grace inhaled a shaky breath and followed without thinking. He didn't go far, only to a quieter hallway near the restrooms, where the lights were dimmer and the music was faint. He pressed his palm against the wall and exhaled slowly, eyes closed. Grace hovered behind him, torn between shame and instinct. She approached softly. "Hey," she whispered. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean." "You did," Ethan said gently. Not harsh. Not bitter. Just honest. Grace froze. He turned to face her, wet hair clinging to his forehead, suit ruined, eyes heartbreakingly calm. "You meant to impress them," he continued. "You didn't think about me at all." Grace felt the words like a knife. She swallowed. "I let them push me into it." "That's worse." The softness in his voice made it sting even more. Her throat tightened. "I don't know why this feels so horrible," she whispered, surprising even herself. "I don't usually care what people think of me. But you. I don't know. It doesn't feel like I just embarrassed a stranger." Ethan's eyes flickered. There was something there, something he tried to hide behind a slow breath. "That's because you didn't," he said softly. Grace's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Ethan stepped back and looked away. "Nothing." The single word was loaded with weight. But before she could push further, a voice echoed down the hall. "There you are." It was Mason, her loud coworker, stumbling in their direction. "Grace, come on. The group shot is starting soon. Forget this guy." Grace flinched. The empath in her, the real Grace, the one she hid from people, felt sick here, but something about last night clung to him more painfully than humiliation usually did. It was her. Grace Turner. He had seen dozens of employees treat him indifferently over the past few weeks while he observed the company from the ground floor, trying to understand its culture before stepping in as CEO. But Grace, she had been different. Warm. Compassionate. Even exhausted, she still carried light. And yet she did it anyway. He replayed the moment again, the hesitation, the forced smile, the flicker of guilt before the wine fell. It wasn't cruelty. Not truly. It was insecurity. Pressure. Loneliness disguised as laughter. He understood it more than he wanted to. But understanding didn't erase the sting. He rubbed his eyes as memories he hadn't invited crept in, of investors mocking him when he was a broke startup kid, of journalists laughing when his first app crashed, of people using him for money once he finally succeeded. He had thought he'd grown past the pain of being underestimated. But humiliation has a way of reopening old wounds. He exhaled shakily. He didn't want revenge. That kind of power meant nothing to him anymore. But he did want to walk into that office with his head held high. And he would, soon. Just, not today. Grace sat at her desk and typed a message to him for the 15th time. "Can we talk? I'm sorry about last night." She stared at the words, fighting the urge to hit send. She finally pressed it. Then waited. The message showed delivered. But not read. Minutes crawled into an hour. An hour into 2. No response. Grace's chest tightened. She stood abruptly and marched to HR. "I need his last name," she said. "And his office extension." Maya blinked. "Grace, you know I can't give you that." "Please," Grace whispered, voice cracking. "I need to apologize." Maya hesitated, then shook her head gently. "What if he doesn't want you to?" The words hit like a slap. Grace left HR with trembling hands. Later that afternoon, she took her lunch break outside, hoping the fresh air would steady her thoughts. But the universe was not done with her yet. As she walked back toward the entrance, she overheard 2 senior employees whispering. "Did you hear? The new CEO is taking over earlier than planned." "Yeah. Rumor says he's already been working undercover." "As who?" No idea. Some kind of consultant or internal observer. Grace froze. Her heart skipped. A consultant? Undercover? New CEO? A chill rippled down her spine. She remembered the way Ethan had said, "You didn't embarrass a stranger." Her hand flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." It couldn't be him. It couldn't. But deep inside, in the place where instinct lived, she already knew. Grace went home and stood under the shower long after the hot water ran out. The steam made the room hazy, but it couldn't blur the truth. If the consultant she humiliated was the new CEO, she wasn't just guilty. She was doomed. Her job, her reputation, her dignity, her future, everything hung by a thread. But beneath the fear, something else pulsed, something she didn't want to name. Why did the thought of hurting him feel worse than the thought of losing everything else? She pressed her forehead against the tile. "I have to fix this," she whispered. "I have to try." Do you believe one humiliating mistake can ever be forgiven? What would you do in Grace's position? Share your thoughts. Someone else might need your perspective. Grace spent the rest of the night pacing her apartment like a caged animal. By morning, she had rehearsed dozens of apologies, none of which sounded remotely enough. She arrived at the office early, an hour early, hoping to catch even a glimpse of him. But Ethan still didn't show. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the entire office received an email. Mandatory division review. All staff conference room A10 a.m. sharp led by E. Ward. The name hit her like a punch to the lungs. E. Ward. Ethan Ward. Her knees nearly buckled. It was him. The man she drenched in wine. The man she humiliated. The man she hurt without understanding why. And now, he was the one leading an all-staff review. Which meant he wasn't just someone important. He was someone powerful. Grace's hands trembled as she grabbed her notebook and headed toward conference room A. Every step felt heavier than the last. When she pushed open the door, she saw coworkers filing in, gossiping in hushed voices. "Did you hear? He's already restructuring. Apparently he's brilliant. He's probably terrifying." Grace sank into a seat near the back. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Then the room fell silent. The door opened, and Ethan walked in. His hair was neatly styled now. His suit was crisp, charcoal gray. He looked composed, commanding, controlled. A man who didn't need to raise his voice to own the room. Grace's breath stalled. He's not the same man from the gala. Or maybe he is, and she just didn't see him clearly. Ethan stepped to the front, placed his papers down, and surveyed the room with quiet confidence. "Good morning," he said. The room responded in a scattered chorus. But Grace heard something different in his voice, restraint. A quiet, sharp edge of unresolved emotion. He scanned the room, and paused when his eyes landed on her. Grace felt it like a spark down her spine. Her fingers gripped her pen so hard it nearly snapped. But Ethan didn't react, not visibly. He continued with the agenda, outlining concerns about productivity, workflow inefficiencies, and upcoming changes. Grace couldn't focus on a single word. Her entire body was tuned to him, his voice, his movements, his silence. When the first breakout assignment was announced, her breath caught in her throat. "For floor analysis, I'll pair you two per team. Let's begin with Grace Turner." Her heart plummeted. "You'll be working with me." A ripple of curiosity swept the room. Someone whispered, "Oh wow," someone else muttered, "Lucky." Grace felt anything but lucky. Her palms dampened. Her stomach twisted. Her throat tightened. Ethan's gaze remained calm, professionally so, but something unreadable flickered beneath. He dismissed the room for a 10-minute break to regroup. Co-workers approached her immediately. "Grace, you're paired with the big boss." Girl, congrats. Make a good impression. She forced a smile, but inside she was unraveling. When the room emptied, Grace approached him cautiously. Ethan, she whispered. He didn't look up from his laptop. It's Mr. Ward in the workplace, he said quietly. The correction stung, not because of the formality, but because of the emotional distance. Grace swallowed hard. I wanted to apologize again. Now isn't the time, Ethan replied, still typing. It wasn't harsh, but it was final. She stepped back, breath shallow. The 10 minutes passed painfully slow. When the room filled again, Grace sat beside him, her chair feeling too small, too close, too exposed. Ethan handed her a printed sheet. We're reviewing team communication patterns, he said. His tone was cool, businesslike. Grace nodded, eyes lowered. Okay. We'll start with department flowcharts and work our way up. Okay. You'll take notes. Okay. The silence between them was suffocating, not angry, not cold, restrained. Like he was holding back something heavy and complicated. Finally, he sighed softly. Grace, look at me. Her head snapped up. His eyes held hers. And what she saw there made her chest ache. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed, wounded, conflicted. He spoke quietly, words measured. I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want revenge. But I need you to know something. Grace swallowed. Oh, okay. You didn't hurt my position, he said. You didn't hurt my pride. You hurt my belief in who you were. Grace's breath trembled. That's why I've been avoiding this conversation, he admitted, voice lower now, almost intimate. Not because you humiliated me, but because you surprised me. Her eyes stung with tears. I'm not that person, she whispered. I swear I'm not. Ethan held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly. We'll see. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't rejection either. It was a door, cracked open. Their forced proximity had begun. For the next few days, Grace and Ethan worked side by side in a tense, hesitant quiet, the kind of silence filled not with animosity, but with unspoken questions neither of them dared to ask. Grace behaved like a shadow, quiet, helpful, overly prepared. Ethan behaved like a wall, steady, unreadable, professional to the point of coldness. But beneath it all, something simmered, an awareness, a pull, a fragile thread tying them closer despite their attempts to pretend otherwise. By Thursday morning, their tasks required reviewing archived internal reports stored in the building's older half-abandoned records wing, a dim, dusty hallway avoided by everyone except the interns forced to fetch ancient files. Forced proximity again. Grace could feel the universe laughing at her. She walked beside Ethan in uneasy silence as they descended into the lower level. The lights flickered occasionally. The air smelled of old paper and forgotten years. Grace shivered. You okay? Ethan asked quietly, his voice softer than it had been all week. She blinked, startled. I'm fine. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her a second longer than necessary, like he didn't entirely believe her. They reached the far end of the records room and began digging through metal filing cabinets. Grace knelt to sort through the bottom drawers, while Ethan handled the upper shelves. 10 minutes passed. 20. 30. They worked in steady silence, broken only by the rustle of papers. Then Grace found it. A small worn folder tucked behind a stack of outdated HR reports. The label was handwritten, W. Daniels, Employee File, Confidential Archive. Ethan, she murmured. What's this? He turned. The moment he saw the name, his entire body stilled. Grace noticed. You know this person? She asked gently. He hesitated, long enough to answer without answering. Grace opened the folder. A photo slipped out. A young man, mid-20s, eyes bright but tired. Hands rough. Shirt cheap. The kind of smile someone wears when they're trying to look hopeful for the camera, but the world hasn't given them many reasons. Grace read the file header aloud. Warehouse associate. Terminated due to budget downsizing. Her heart squeezed. He looks like you, she said softly. Ethan stared at the photo, jaw tightening. That's my brother, he said finally. Grace's breath caught. Oh. Ethan took the file gently, brushing dust off the edge with a thumb. He worked here 10 years ago. Long before I ever thought I'd step foot in this building. His voice lowered. Long before I bought it. Grace's eyes widened. She had never imagined he had a connection to the company deeper than business. What happened? She whispered. Ethan exhaled, a slow, controlled release of emotion. He was laid off without warning. No severance. No support. No chance to appeal. His voice tightened, soft but sharp. He'd given everything to this place. Grace's heart cracked. And the layoffs, they crushed him. He spiraled. Depression. Debt. Shame. He paused. He never recovered. Grace felt her throat close. Ethan. I'm so sorry. He nodded, eyes fixed on the photo. I promised myself that if I ever had enough power to protect people like him, I would. No more careless leadership. No more decisions that destroy people quietly. Grace swallowed. Suddenly the undercover consultant role made sense. The silence. The careful observation. The reason he watched people so closely. He wasn't just evaluating performance. He was searching for the truth, who deserved to stay, who needed support, and who treated others with cruelty when they thought no one was watching. She felt shame burn through her. Is that why you reacted the way you did at the gala? She whispered. Ethan looked up, really looked at her. Partly, he said, but not entirely. Grace's heartbeat stumbled. He hesitated, then added quietly, because before that moment, I thought you were different. The words landed like a blade. Grace felt tears rise, uninvited and impossible to swallow down. I am different, she whispered. I promise you I am. I wasn't myself that night. Ethan closed the file gently and tucked the photo back inside. What were you then? He asked softly. Grace stared at her trembling hands. I was someone trying too hard not to feel alone. The confession slipped out without warning. Ethan's expression shifted. Something softened, something human, something fragile. Grace. He spoke her name like it mattered. Like it meant something. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold herself together. I've been alone a long time, she whispered. Not because I want to be. Just, life kept giving me reasons to protect myself. And that night, I let people push me into being the cruel version of myself I hate the most. Silence stretched between them, a silence full of truth, pain, longing. Ethan set the file aside and knelt down in front of her, close enough for her to feel his breath. You're not cruel, he said softly. You made a mistake. A painful one. But not who you are. Grace's chest tightened, so hard it almost hurt. Then why does it feel like I ruined everything? She whispered. His eyes held hers. Because it mattered to you, he said gently. Grace's breath caught. Their faces were inches apart. Her pulse pounded. His voice lowered. You wouldn't be hurting this much if you didn't care. Her heart splintered and reformed all at once. And then, because the universe couldn't resist, the lights above them flickered sharply, buzzing the way old circuitry does before failing. Grace jumped at the sudden pop. Ethan instinctively reached out, steadying her by the arm. Their eyes locked again. The power in the building hummed dangerously. Then, the lights went out. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked automatically. Grace gasped. We're stuck, she whispered. Ethan tried the door. Yes, he sighed. Backup locks. The generator must have kicked in. Forced proximity, again. Grace swallowed hard. Just the two of us, she murmured. Ethan's gaze softened, shadows flickering over his face. Maybe, he said quietly, that's exactly what we need. The darkness wrapped around the records room like a thick blanket, swallowing the edges of shelves and turning the air into something warm, close, and strangely intimate. Grace stood still, her pulse a trembling flutter in her throat. She could barely make out Ethan's silhouette, tall, controlled, steady despite the unexpected blackout. She heard him exhale softly. It's all right, he murmured. Backup generators sometimes trigger door locks. Maintenance will reset them soon. But something in his voice told her this moment was not an inconvenience. It was an opportunity. Grace leaned against a metal cabinet and whispered, I didn't realize being trapped in a basement with my boss would end up on my resume someday. That earned the faintest breath of a laugh, small, surprised, reluctant. I'm not officially your boss yet, Ethan said. Technically. Technically, she echoed, letting the words soften between them. The room hummed with silence again. But it wasn't the cold, tense silence from before. It was warmer. Fuller. A silence that invited truth. Grace crossed her arms to steady herself. Can I ask you something? Ethan's shadow shifted. Of course. Why did you come in disguised as a consultant? Couldn't you have just walked into the building and said you were the CEO? He took a slow breath. Power makes people behave differently, he said. Sometimes better. Sometimes worse. But rarely honestly. Grace swallowed. And you wanted honesty, she whispered. Yes, he said quietly. I wanted to see who people were when they had nothing to gain from me. Grace's chest tightened. And you saw me at my worst. She meant it as a statement, but the pain in her voice cracked around the edges. Ethan stepped closer. Not too close, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of him in the darkness. I saw you doing something you didn't want to do, he corrected gently. That's different. Grace blinked, surprised. How can you tell that? Because your eyes apologized before your mouth did. Her breath hitched. He had noticed. He had seen her, even in her ugliest moment. Grace wrapped her arms around herself. I hate that version of me. The people-pleasing follower who does things to avoid feeling like the outsider. I thought I left her behind years ago. Ethan stepped closer, voice softer now. Everyone does things they regret when they're trying not to feel alone. The truth of it hit her so sharply she had to look away. Then she heard him lower himself to sit on the floor. The rustle of his suit, the dull thud of his back against the wall. After a moment, his voice drifted through the dark. Sit with me. You don't have to stand all the way over there. Grace hesitated, then slowly sank to the floor a few feet from him, their silhouettes barely visible in the faint emergency glow from a hallway window. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of his quiet, or his power, or her guilt. She was afraid of something else entirely. What she was starting to feel for him. Ethan cleared his throat softly. Can I tell you something? Something I haven't said out loud in a long time. Grace nodded, forgetting he might not see it. Yes, please. I don't like being the boss, he admitted. Everyone assumes power is something to crave, something glamorous. But when I walk into a room as a CEO, people stop being themselves. They become careful. Pretend. Distant. Grace whispered, that sounds lonely. It is, he said. The naked honesty in his voice made her breath stutter. I wanted, just once, to see how people treated me when they didn't know who I was. When I was just a man in a room. Grace rested her head lightly against the wall. And how did that go for you? A beat of silence. Mixed results, he said dryly. Grace laughed, a soft, gentle bubble of sound that warmed the darkness. Ethan continued, voice quieter now. But it wasn't all negative. Grace turned her face slightly toward him. You don't know this, he said, but I saw you long before the gala. The way you treated people. The way you worked. The way you defended interns when senior staff talked down to them. Grace froze. You noticed that? I noticed everything about you, he said softly. Her heart tripped. Ethan inhaled slowly, then added, you were the reason I didn't give up on this place before even taking office. Grace's throat tightened with emotion. Before she could respond, a loud hum echoed through the building. The lights flickered once, twice, then blinked back on, flooding the room with harsh fluorescent brightness. She blinked rapidly, eyes adjusting, and suddenly she saw him clearly. Ethan Ward. Sitting beside her on the dusty floor of a forgotten records room. Tie loosened. Hair slightly messy. Eyes warm in a way she didn't think he was capable of. Their gazes collided. Neither of them looked away. Grace's voice cracked the silence. Ethan. I'm scared. Not of you, but of this. He swallowed. So am I. Her breath hitched. Why? She whispered. His answer was soft, fragile, real. Because you're the first person I've wanted to trust in a long time, and the one person who has the power to hurt me without meaning to. Grace's chest tightened painfully. She reached out, slowly, and brushed her fingers against his hand. He didn't pull away. For a few precious seconds, they stayed like that. Connected. Soft. Human. Then the hallway intercom crackled. Power restored. All basement doors unlocked. Ethan cleared his throat and rose to his feet, offering her a hand. Grace took it. And in that simple, gentle gesture, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not love. Not yet. But possibility. The next morning should have felt different. It should have felt new. Light. Hopeful, even. After that night in the records room, Grace walked into the office with something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Possibility. She replayed the moment they sat together. The way he'd spoken. The way his voice had shifted, soft, unguarded, painfully honest. He trusted her last night. At least, it felt like he had. And for the first time since the humiliating wine incident, she believed she might deserve forgiveness. She even believed that he might see her, not the mistake she made, not the pressure she caved under, but her. She entered the building with a shy smile she couldn't shake. But the universe had been waiting for this exact moment to strike back. Hard. The announcement. At 9 a.m. sharp, every employee received a new all-staff notification. Company-wide address, CEO Ethan Ward location, Atrium Hall time, 9:30 a.m. People buzzed with excitement. The new CEO is finally introducing himself. I heard he's young. I heard he's ruthless. I heard he's brilliant. Grace froze, stomach twisting. He's revealing himself today. Everything inside her tightened with panic. This was the moment the company would learn who he was, and she would be exposed for humiliating him in front of everyone. Her hands shook as she walked to the atrium, every step heavier than the last. When she arrived, employees filled the room. Cameras were set up. Executives lined the front row. A low hum of anticipation vibrated through the crowd. Grace scanned the space for Ethan. She found him near the stage, speaking quietly with the board members. He looked different, not the man from the basement, not the man from the gala. This was the CEO. Straight shoulders. Controlled breath. Eyes focused, unreadable, a fortress sealed tight. The moment his gaze swept the room and locked on her, something inside him shifted. Not warmth. Not softness. A flicker of conflict, then a wall slamming into place. Grace's heart dropped. He turned away before she could read anything else. Ethan stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. He adjusted the microphone, his voice steady and professional, almost too calm. "Good morning. My name is Ethan Ward, and as of this week, I am officially stepping in as the Chief Executive Officer of Aurora Dynamics." Gasps rippled through the room. Grace's co-workers whispered hoarsely, "Wait, that's the consultant? No way. Oh my God, Grace, wasn't that the guy?" She felt the floor sway under her feet. Ethan continued, "I've spent the past month working alongside you to understand the culture, the workflow, and the people who make this company what it is." His eyes grazed the crowd, but when they neared her, he looked away sharply. Grace felt the sting. Deep. Sharp. Unmistakable. Not hatred, but hurt. Distance. Fear. He wasn't just avoiding her. He was protecting himself. The accusation. Then, out of nowhere, one executive, a bitter older man named Mr. Lennox, raised his hand loudly. "So, Mr. Ward, is it true you were mistreated at the gala?" The room gasped. Ethan tensed. Grace's blood ran cold. Lennox smirked. "There are photos circulating. A woman pouring wine on your head. A humiliating display." Whispers spread like wildfire. Ethan's jaw tightened, not at Lennox, but at the public exposure of something deeply private. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Lennox continued, smug. Should the perpetrator be disciplined? Fired? Exposed? Grace's breath hitched. Her knees weakened. People turned to look for the culprit, for her. She wished she could disappear. Ethan finally spoke, voice sharp as steel. "That is none of your concern." But Lennox pushed on. "Still, it sets a dangerous precedent. Allowing employees to humiliate leadership." "Enough," Ethan said. But the crowd was already murmuring. Staring. Judging. Grace felt her face burn with shame and terror. Then Lennox added the final strike. "We deserve to know who she is." Grace couldn't breathe. Her heart slammed painfully in her chest. Ethan's expression changed, a flicker of pain, anger, conflict, but he was cornered. If he protected her too strongly, people would suspect favoritism. If he didn't, Grace would be destroyed. He looked directly at her. The moment their eyes met, everything stilled. Thousands of emotions crashed in his expression: grief, disappointment, fear, longing, hurt, and then he shut it all down, sealing himself behind a CEO's mask. He exhaled slowly. "The incident," he said carefully, "is confidential. It will remain confidential. No names will be shared." But the damage was done. People followed his gaze. Just briefly. Just enough. And someone whispered, "Wait, wasn't that Grace Turner?" The room turned. Dozens of eyes landed on her. Grace felt exposed, stripped, humiliated all over again. She backed away, breath uneven. Her vision blurred. Her chest tightened until she couldn't inhale. Then someone behind her muttered loud enough. She embarrassed the CEO. She's done. Grace's tears finally spilled. She ran. Ethan flinched, visibly, but didn't follow. Couldn't follow. Not here. Not now. Not with the entire company watching. And in that moment, Grace felt something break inside her that she didn't think could ever be repaired. Not her pride. Not her job. Her heart. Because for the first time, she truly believed he didn't want her anymore. Grace didn't remember how she reached the elevator. Her legs carried her on instinct, eyes blurred with tears, heart pounding like she'd been running for miles. When the elevator doors closed, she pressed the wall with both palms and let the sob escape, raw quiet, breaking her open. It wasn't just embarrassment. It wasn't just the fear of losing her job. It was him. Ethan. The way he'd looked at her, torn, conflicted, protective, and yet powerless in that moment, replayed in her mind like a cruel loop. He hadn't exposed her. He'd shielded her. But he also hadn't stopped the damage. He couldn't. Not without destroying himself. The elevator reached the ground floor. She stepped out, trembling, and left the building through the side exit to avoid more stairs. Outside, the wind hit her cheeks, cooling the tears that kept slipping down. She pressed her hand over her chest. "Why does it hurt so much?" she whispered. She sat on the concrete step by the loading dock, hugging her knees, letting the cold metal railing anchor her. The city moved on around her, cars rushing by, people chatting, life continuing, but she stayed frozen in her own little world of shame and heartbreak. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. She wasn't sure. Then her phone buzzed. "Unknown number, where are you?" Her breath caught. "Ethan." She stared at the message, fingers hovering, unsure what to say. What did he want? To check on her? To reprimand her? To fire her gently? Another message came. "Please, don't leave." Her heart twisted sharply. She typed back with shaking fingers. "I need air." The response came immediately. "Don't go far." Why did that line make her chest ache? Why did it feel like a plea rather than an order? She wiped her tears and replied, "I'm outside. Near the loading dock." No more messages. But footsteps soon echoed behind her. She didn't turn around. He approached slowly, like he was afraid of startling her. When he finally sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance, they stayed silent for nearly a full minute. Not awkward. Heavy. Necessary. The kind of silence where every heartbeat feels like a confession. Finally, he spoke. "Grace." Her name cracked softly in his voice. "I am so sorry." A fresh tear slipped down her cheek. "You didn't need to apologize," she whispered. "You did nothing wrong." "I did," he said quietly. "I didn't stop it. I didn't protect you." "You're the CEO," Grace said. "You couldn't show favoritism. They already think you're biased." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let them think it. I would have taken every rumor if it meant sparing you that moment." Grace finally turned her head. His eyes were softer than she'd seen all week, wounded, remorseful, and full of something she didn't dare name yet. "You didn't do anything wrong," she murmured again. He inhaled shakily. "But I hurt you," he said. "And that I can't forgive myself for." Grace shook her head. "No. They hurt me. Not you." Ethan looked away, silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that hides 1,000 unsaid things. Then, barely above a whisper, "I care about you." Grace's breath caught. He said it like a confession, like a risk, like a truth he'd been holding too long. She stared at him, heart trembling. "You care about me?" He nodded slowly, eyes glistening with something raw. "More than I intended to." Her chest tightened painfully. "Ethan, why didn't you look at me today?" she whispered. "When you were speaking. When they brought up the gala. Why did you look away?" He closed his eyes. "Because if I had looked at you," he said softly, "I wouldn't have been able to keep my composure." Grace's breath left her in a shaky exhale. He continued, voice thickening with emotion. "I spent years building walls around myself. And then you," he swallowed. "You got past them without even trying." Grace blinked through tears. He turned to her, slowly, deliberately. "And I'm terrified," he admitted. Grace felt like she was falling. "Of me," she whispered. "Of losing control around you," he said. "Of caring too much. Of making decisions with my heart instead of my job. Of wanting to protect you even when I shouldn't. Of being someone who could be hurt by you." Her hand reached for his before she could think. Ethan inhaled sharply at the contact, but didn't pull away. He clasped her hand tightly, as if holding her grounded him. Grace whispered, "I'm scared too." He brushed his thumb gently against her knuckles. "Why?" "Because I've never cared for someone I wasn't supposed to," she said, voice trembling. "Because you're the CEO. Because I messed up so badly. Because you saw me at my worst and you still," her voice broke, "you still came after me." Ethan's eyes glimmered with something powerful. "I didn't come after an employee," he said softly. "I came after you." Grace's breath faltered. Then breakingly, painfully, he whispered, "Tell me I didn't misread this. Tell me I'm not the only one feeling this." Grace's voice cracked in her throat. "You're not," she whispered. He closed his eyes in relief, pure, aching relief, and breathed out the tension he'd been holding for weeks. A gentle wind passed through the alley, lifting a stray lock of her hair. He reached up, hesitated, then tucked it behind her ear with trembling fingers. "Grace," he said softly, "what do we do now?" She swallowed hard. "We choose." His eyebrows lifted. "Choose what?" She squeezed his hand. "Whether we run from this, or face it together." Ethan stared at her, truly stared, and in his eyes she saw every emotion he had tried to hide. Fear, hope, longing, regret, desire, and something dangerously close to love. He whispered, "Then make the choice with me." Grace exhaled shakily. She nodded. "I choose you." His breath caught. "Even after everything," he whispered. "Especially after everything." The building felt different when Grace and Ethan walked back inside. It wasn't the walls. It wasn't the lighting. It wasn't the murmuring employees who pretended not to stare. It was something deeper, something quiet and steady between them. An unspoken promise sealed in the cold morning air: we choose each other now. Grace walked a few steps behind Ethan, giving him space to move through the atrium as the CEO he needed to be right now. But every few seconds, he glanced over his shoulder, a small subtle check to make sure she was still there. She was. And she would stay. The company was still buzzing with gossip from the reveal. Eyes trailed them down the hallway. But for once, Grace didn't shrink under the weight of attention. Because she wasn't walking alone. Ethan stopped outside the conference room, exhaled, then looked at her. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. Grace met his gaze with quiet courage. "I'm sure." He nodded slowly. "Then stay with me." She did. They entered the room together. The board members looked startled when Grace stepped inside behind Ethan. Lennox, the executive who'd tried to expose her earlier, stiffened. His eyes narrowed at her presence. Ethan noticed. He placed a hand on the back of Grace's chair, a small deliberate gesture of protection. "This meeting," Ethan began calmly, "is about our company's future. Not about personal attacks." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Lennox sat forward, voice smug. "Mr. Ward, with all due respect, the employee who—" Ethan held up a hand. "Her name is Grace Turner," he said clearly. "And I will not allow anyone in this company to speak about her behind her back." Grace's breath hitched. A quiet wave of shock moved through the room. Ethan continued, voice firm but controlled. "She made a mistake. She apologized. And I accepted that apology. End of discussion." Lennox's jaw tightened. "You're allowing personal bias to cloud your judgment." Ethan's expression didn't change. But the temperature in the room did. "This is not bias," he said. "This is leadership." He walked to the center of the table. "And speaking of bias, let's address yours." Lennox blinked. "Mine." Ethan tapped the folder on the table, the same folder from the basement. The one with his brother's name. "You terminated employees without review. Without compassion. Without care," Ethan said. "People suffered because of your decisions. I'm not letting this company repeat that history." Lennox paled. Ethan continued, steady and unwavering. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position. Gasps erupted. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Lennox tried to protest, but board members quietly supported the decision. Everyone knew his reputation. Everyone had seen the consequences. Ethan ended the meeting swiftly, professionally, decisively. When the boardroom emptied, he finally turned to Grace. "You deserve to be defended," he said softly. "I should have done it sooner." Grace stepped closer. "You just did," she whispered, in the way that mattered. He looked down at her, truly looked, and something softened in him. "You don't have to stay here," he murmured. "Not after everything. I can help you find a position elsewhere, something better." Grace shook her head before he could finish. "I don't want to leave," she whispered. "Not the company. Not you." The truth in her voice made his breath falter. Later that afternoon, Ethan sent her a simple message. "Meet me on the roof." The rooftop garden was empty, quiet, washed in late afternoon gold. Grace stepped out into the warmth, heart beating steadily, not with fear, but with calm. Ethan stood near the railing, hands in his pockets, wind brushing through his hair. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "You came," he said softly. "Always," she replied. He swallowed, eyes searching hers. "I've thought about this all day," he said. "And I want to say this right." Grace waited, breath trembling. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, like approaching something precious. "Grace," his voice cracked slightly. "The night of the gala, the moment you poured that wine on me, it hurt. It reminded me of every time I was judged, dismissed, or treated like nothing." Grace lowered her head, guilt tightening in her chest. But Ethan reached out gently and lifted her chin. "But the pain wasn't what stuck with me," he whispered. "What stayed with me was the look in your eyes right after. Guilt. Shock. Humanity." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "And in the records room, I saw the real you." He exhaled shakily. "And I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since." A tear slipped down her cheek. He brushed it away with his thumb. "But that's not why we're here," Ethan continued. "We're here because I want to choose you intentionally. Not out of wounded pride. Not out of guilt. But because you're the one person who sees me, really sees me, without the title." Grace stepped closer until her chest nearly brushed his. "I don't want the title," she whispered. "I want you." His breath hitched. Wind rushed between them, cool and soft. Ethan lifted a hand and cupped her face, gently, reverently, as though asking permission with every inch. "Grace," his voice trembled. "Tell me this isn't just forgiveness." "It isn't," she breathed. "Tell me it isn't just gratitude." "It isn't. Tell me this is real." She placed her hand over his heart, steady, strong hers. "It's real," she whispered. "It's us." He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Then slowly, carefully, beautifully, he leaned in and kissed her. Warm. Soft. Unrushed. A promise wrapped in tenderness. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to take this slow," he whispered. "Carefully. Honestly." Grace smiled through tears. "Slow can still be beautiful." "Especially with you," he murmured. She laughed softly, lifting his collar. "You know," she said, half teasing, "I never poured wine on anyone again." He raised an eyebrow. "Good." A playful glint entered her eyes. "But if I ever do, I hope he forgives me half as well as you did." Ethan touched her cheek, smiling. "It won't happen again," he said. "Because the only drink I ever want on me again is champagne, at our wedding." Her breath caught. He blinked. "I mean someday maybe if we—" Grace kissed him again to stop the adorable panic. "We'll get there," she whispered. one step at a time. And for the first time since the night of the gala, she believed it. Unexpected love. Chosen love. Healing love. Love at last. Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place, or with the last person you thought you would? Share your story below. Someone out there might need the hope your experience brings.